The test is in 4 parts: Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. Now look at Part 1.
Part 1.
We'll hear two students, Jacinta and Lewis, discussing a holiday they are planning in Queenstown, a tourist center in New Zealand popular with young people. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Hi, Lewis. It's Jacinta here.
Oh, hi, Jacinta. I was just going to call you. I was thinking we ought to do something about accommodation for our trip to Queenstown.
Yeah, actually, that's just why I rang you. I've been looking on the internet. There was one place that looked okay called Traveller's Lodge, but when I checked availability for January, when we're planning to go, I found it was fully booked.
Right. Well, we'd better do something now, I suppose.
I've actually got a list up here on the computer. There's one place called Bingley's that looks possible. It's $1975 a night. That's US dollars. They quote all the prices in US dollars.
So that's about 26 or 27 New Zealand dollars. That's okay. That'll be in a dormitory, is it?
Yeah, they say 8-bed dorms, and the hostel's right in the town centre, and they've got a cafe. They have theme nights every weekend, whatever that means.
Oh, you know, like certain sorts of food and music. And people might wear special clothes like that Egyptian evening we went to last year.
Oh, okay. What else? They've got a sun deck area, and then all the usual things, internet access and so on.
Sounds good. Was there anywhere else?
Yeah, a couple more places. There's one called Chalet Lodge, which is just 18 US dollars. That's for a bed in a 12-bed dorm. They do single and family rooms as well. It looks as if it's a bit out of town. Says it's got an alpine setting, a quiet alpine setting. What do you think?
Not sure.
Oh, but actually it's not far out at all. It says 10 minutes walk from town, so... Oh, and it says it's children-friendly.
I'm not so sure about that. What about the third place?
That's called Globetrotters. Let's see. They do private rooms or 5-bed dorms for $18.50. It's in the centre, just by the lake, and that includes breakfast.
Didn't the other two?
I don't think so. They didn't mention it, so probably not. Oh, and it says something about a free skydive. Wow.
Don't know if I'm all that keen on jumping out of aeroplanes.
Oh, actually, what it says is you can win a chance to do a skydive. They give one away every day to one of the guests.
Well, if I win it, you can do it. Anyway, do they have room?
Yeah, I checked the availability. Shall I go ahead and book there then?
Fine.
You now have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
I was looking at what there is to do too. There are lots of sites offering deals for adventure sports. I suppose we have to do a bungee jump.
Why?
Well, it's Queenstown where they more or less started it as a sport.
You can, if you really want to jump off the side of a bridge with an elastic rope tied round your ankles. I'll watch.
Okay, so what do you want to do?
As far as adventure sports go, I was talking to someone who went whitewater rafting there. He said it was really awesome. They drive you up the Shotover River and then you come down on a rubber raft through the whitewater rapids where the river's really narrow and fast and end up going through a tunnel nearly 200 metres long. I think it's quite expensive though.
Oh, I'm on for that if you are.
Cool.
The other thing you can do is the jet boat ride. That sounded just a lot of noise though. It's basically just whizzing round on the river on a very fast boat, isn't it?
My friend did that as well. He said it was a bit touristy, but worth it. I'll give it a go. You go right up the river canyon. He said the drivers were really skillful, but I don't mind going on my own.
But there's lots to do as well as the whole commercial adventure bit. We ought to do some trekking. The scenery around there's amazing. I don't want to miss that. The place to start's Glenorchy, apparently, about 40 minutes drive. That's where lots of the wilderness trails begin.
Okay, I'll pack my walking boots. I'd better start getting in training. I haven't done anything except sit at my desk for months. Now, is there anything else we need to decide?
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear an extract from a radio program for people who live abroad. Listen and answer questions 11 to 17. Listen and answer questions 11 to 17.
You're listening to Expat News, a weekly broadcast for the English-speaking community in this great city. In today's programme, we'll be hearing from Tom O'Hara, who's going to tell us about all those different associations you can join. Tom.
Good evening. Yes, in a city with so many of its residents born outside the country, it's hardly surprising there's such a huge range of expatriate clubs and societies. And many of these, of course, are aimed at English speakers. So, first and perhaps most obviously, we have the sports clubs, which in some cases field teams in things like rugby and tennis that compete against clubs in other parts of the country or even abroad. You don't have to play at this level to have fun, though. They can be just a great way to do some exercise and, of course, to get to know other people, especially if you're new in town. The same can be said of the many hobby and interest clubs that have sprung up here. Everything from landscape photography, such as the Viewfinders Club in the Harbour District, or Focus on the Airport Road, to old favourites like stamp collecting. Remember that this country has a long tradition of unusual and perhaps even eccentric societies, so there should be something for everyone. A place where you can meet people of different nationalities with the same social and/or cultural interests as you. For those who may be interested in rather more than just friendship, there's a wide range of lively social clubs. Several singles associations organise dancing of various kinds, while for people in a real hurry, there's speed dating, in which everyone talks to everyone else for just 5 minutes. Then, at the end, they decide which of them they would like to meet again by ticking their names on a list. In complete contrast to these are the many religious associations, reflecting the diversity of faith groups present in this multicultural city. Many of them, of course, have their own places of worship. Perhaps also of interest to those who've come here from other parts of the world are the international and cultural societies. These often provide a meeting place for people from a specific country, China, for instance, and particular ethnic groups, such as Afro-Caribbeans. As in other major cities, we have here local branches of many charities with names familiar around the world. Meetings of human rights organisations like Amnesty International are held regularly in English, as are those of environmental groups such as Greenpeace. All funds raised, by the way, go to the same kinds of good cause as they do in other countries you may have lived in. Inevitably, perhaps, there are also the political clubs, often connected with a particular party and, indeed, a particular country. So we have, for example, a local association of Republicans linked to and campaigning for that party in the US, and Liberal Democrats here doing the same for their party in Britain. Finally, on a lighter note, there's plenty to choose from in the performing arts. Whether you enjoy taking part or just watching and listening, you can take your pick from a whole range of groups. To take just a couple of examples, there's light opera at the Memorial Hall in the city centre, or a very lively amateur theatre company in the Park District. In summer, they give open-air performances of Shakespeare plays, free of charge.
Now answer questions 18 to 20. Now answer questions 18 to 20.
I should mention at this point that clearly some districts have a higher concentration of English-speaking clubs than others, and that certain parts of town tend to specialise in particular activities. An obvious example would be the number of water sports clubs down near the river. Whatever the number, though, they usually have one thing in common. With the exception of a few associations linked to particular countries and supported by their embassies here, in the vast majority of cases, it is the individual members who fund them, so an entry fee or a subscription will be charged. You may be used to council-subsidised sports centres and the like in your home country, but I'm afraid that's not the case here. Assuming you can afford it then, you can be fairly sure that somewhere out there you'll find a club that caters for your own particular fascination. If it's very important to you and you intend to spend a lot of time on it, it might even determine which district of the city you decide to live in. In the unlikely event that you really can't find such a club, the solution is to try to persuade friends and anyone else you meet of the need for one. You could also use the local small ads on the internet to suggest the idea. You'll be amazed at just how many people share even the strangest interest. Then you can start your own.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You are going to hear a conversation on animal protection. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen to the tape and answer the questions.
Thanks for joining us today, Mike. How did Baja California become a consideration for a condor release?
Our recovery plan for California condors requires us to re-establish the birds in as much as their former range as possible. Baja, being the southernmost recent range for the California condor, works well in that they were only recently lost from the area, mid-1930s, and considerable habitat still remains. It is very isolated with very few people in the area. The mountains are spectacular, ranging up to 10,000 feet, or 3,000 meters. Our selected release site is at nearly 8,000 feet, 2,400 meters.
Mike, how many birds do you envision flying free in this area, Baja, in the future?
We will be releasing 4 to 8 birds on a yearly basis and will reconsider the situation when we have 20 birds in the area.
What age do the birds have to be before moving them?
That's a good question. Typically, we move them at 8 months to 18 months old. Birds are ready to fledge, or leave, from the nest at 6 to 7 months of age. In our current release group in Baja, we have birds as old as 30 months. It will be interesting to see how they behave. I expect that they will want to range more than younger birds and make it challenging for us to keep up.
Is there a maximum number of birds a certain area can support?
Yes, it's called the carrying capacity for any area, for any species. In our case, our strategy to find that number is to saturate the environment to a level where we determine that the birds are showing difficulty either in finding food, behaviourally, or in survivorship. That level is greatly determined by the availability of food in the area and nesting possibilities.
Now look at questions 26 to 30. As the talk continues, answer questions 26 to 30.
What do you hope to accomplish with this release in the long run?
I expect that well within 10 years the condors will be flying north and joining birds already released in Southern California. Hopefully we will reach at least 150 birds in each of these populations within about 15 years.
What would you say is the biggest contribution to the California Condor program's success?
That would have to be the fact that we were able to breed the birds in captivity from the 27 birds we started with in 1987 to the 205 birds we have today. This is thanks to cooperation between the San Diego Wild Animal Park, the Los Angeles Zoo, and the World Center for Birds of Prey in Boise, Idaho.
Are there any problems keeping track of and protecting your released animals outside of the US?
Nope. We are using radio transmitters and will be using the new satellite and GPS transmitters as well.
Which system is better?
Using satellites. The advantages over radio telemetry are numerous. It makes it possible to keep up with the bird's flight without being led miles in a matter of minutes. It took the young condor only a week to migrate across the state, and with just radio telemetry, poor weather can keep a plane grounded, and not all roads are accessible to track them on ground. New technology will allow one to be able to track birds that are not accessible by plane. Also, it is a new way to gauge the effectiveness of reintroduction.
How so?
If a condor transmitter works properly, researchers will get a location every 10 days for about 2 years.
Do you see an end in sight for the need to breed condors in captivity?
Yes, that would be great. But it will take a while for us to establish the 2 wild populations and make sure that they are sustainable. Part of our recovery is to maintain a captive flock of 150 birds in various zoos around the country as a safety net for the future.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
Listen to somebody giving a talk about homelessness and check your ideas.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Now, I'll start by explaining what homeless means, and it means a little more than simply sleeping out in the street. The people you see in parks and gardens or bus stops and shop doorways are a small percentage of the people that we class as homeless. People are homeless if they are sleeping on the floor or on the sofa at a friend's house. They are homeless if they are sleeping in a hostel or shelter for homeless people. They are homeless if they are sleeping in a car or any other vehicle. We also class people as homeless if they are separated from family or other people that they would normally live with. People are homeless if they live in conditions that are so bad that their health is affected. And they are homeless if they are in danger of violence or physical abuse. That means, as I said before, that homelessness is a much bigger issue than a few people sleeping in bus stops or shop doorways. This is just what you see. So why do people become homeless? People do not choose to be homeless. They are not sleeping rough because they have chosen to leave a safe home or families who love them. They are homeless because there is no other option. People become homeless because they are poor, because they cannot afford to pay rent, or sometimes because they cannot afford to pay the mortgage on a house or apartment that they have bought. People become homeless because they lose their job or have never had a job. There are related problems that often result in a person becoming homeless. Many homeless people have a drug addiction. They are either homeless because they spend their money on drugs, or they have become addicted to drugs because they are homeless. A high percentage of homeless people have mental health problems and find it difficult to make the decisions about their lives that most people can make. A number of homeless people are ex-prisoners. When they are released from prison, it is very difficult to find a job and a place to live. Many people become homeless because the owner of their home, a landlord or landlady, evicts them. If people have lived in the same place for a long time and then suddenly lose it, they can find it impossible to afford the increased rent for a new home. Many people have to move out of the place they live because it is dangerous. A young person may have a violent father or a wife a violent husband. These people are too afraid to stay in their home, and they risk making themselves homeless. Finally, in many parts of the country, there is just not enough housing, certainly not enough housing that poor people can afford. The increase in the value of property has made life difficult for many people, not just homeless people. I'm sure many of you will understand that. So, how do we deal with a problem as big as this? It isn't easy. In this country, people with very poorly paid jobs or no jobs at all receive some kind of financial support. In some cases, all or part of their rent is paid by the government. This helps to stop people becoming homeless. But if you are already homeless, it doesn't help. Most towns, like this one, have shelters for people who are temporarily homeless, but they cannot stay at them permanently. They have to move on after a certain period of time. Some towns have food kitchens where homeless people can get a meal 2 or 3 times a week. The problem is that shelters and food kitchens don't really deal with the cause of the problem. They deal only with the effect. People can stay in a shelter for a while, but it will not help them to find a home of their own, and that is what they need, of course. Now, I'm going to go on in a moment to talk about some of the suggestions that have been made in terms of dealing with homelessness. Ideas for dealing with the problem in a more permanent way. I'll also talk about some of the programs that are in place and are in some cases very successful in other parts of the world. Before that, does anyone have any questions about what I have said so far?
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.